So, why the capacity market? Well, as Andrew described, the proportion of intermittent generation through wind and inflexible through nuclear means that gas-fired plants are likely to run less often in the future, and so will rely on high prices when it is running to recover the investment costs. And the government's worried that the existing mechanisms in the market won't deliver the revenue that you need in order to invest, because it's difficult to price reliability. Because, as Stephen just mentioned, the existing system on balancing is thought to penalise insufficiently those who come off the system, and so it's thought that it doesn't send the right signals. There are concerns that the government's going to act to actually curb wholesale price spikes, and nobody knows really what the impact of government policies on electricity market reform is going to be. So the government's going to try to address these through supporting Ofgem on its significant code review around cash out. It's looking at initiatives to reduce future peak electricity demand, though I can't see that that's particularly a signal for investment in generating capacity. And it wants to support diversity in generation sources through EMR. Well, the government's spinning this levy control framework two ways. It's saying to the renewables and nuclear industry, look, it's brilliant, you've got 7.6 billion in today's prices for contracts for difference in 2020, but it's busy saying to the gas markets, oh, look, we're only going to give them 7.6 billion, don't worry, there's plenty of money left for gas. So it's quite clever of them, really. And it's going to support the Commission on the development of the single European energy market. But happily, it recognises that all this is probably not sufficient, so it's introducing, or it's minded to introduce, a capacity market. So the capacity mechanism is aiming to essentially top up income through providing an additional source of revenue when in return for providing capacity. And this is a top-up. It's completely separate from any other income you receive. So it's not like the renewables and nuclear contracts for difference, which will top up to a fixed level what you get from the market prices. This is additional to what you receive through the market. So they're going to implement this by forecasting future peak demand 4 years ahead. And the amount of capacity they're actually going to contract for, they are going to decide in the future. But it's going to be contracted annually through competitive auction. Apparently ministers are going to decide how much capacity is needed. And generation and non-generation, such as demand-side response, is going to be able to compete. I think the government recognises it's going to be quite difficult to compare demand-side response with generation, so it's going to run some transitional arrangements for demand-side response to see how it works. And all generation, new and existing, can compete in the capacity market, except plant which is qualified for an EMR contract for difference. So the eligibility criteria to see if you can compete are to be determined, but it will involve things which are probably quite similar to what they've introduced for renewables and nuclear in order to qualify for CFD, which is looking at how much progress have you made. So you can't bid into the capacity market if you're just thinking about a plant. You have to have spent some money. In the world of EMR, you have to have spent quite a lot of money and got quite a long way down the route of getting development consent, of having got actually your major contracts in place. So it's quite a difficult balance between knowing how far to go if you are relying on the capacity payment to make it economic, versus not wanting to spend that money if you're actually not going to get the capacity payment, or you're not going to get it at a level which makes it economic for you. So if you succeed in this market, you'll enter into a capacity agreement, and you have to commit to provide electricity when you are required. And if you don't provide that capacity when required, and there'll be checks on whether or not you can provide capacity quite aside from when the system actually requires your electricity, then there will be financial penalties. And the costs of the capacity market are going to be shared by suppliers in the delivery year. Grid is described as being the delivery body. So grids will sort of advise government and take on lots of administrative functions, but won't play any role in the actual contract structure itself. Government spent quite a long time, I think, trying to persuade Grid to put all sorts of organisations onto its balance sheet in its group. And Grid hasn't agreed, and all of these arrangements are going to have to remain essentially within the public sector. So government said it's minded to run the first capacity auction in 2014 for the delivery of capacity in 2018. It hasn't, but of course, until it decides whether or not it is going to, it's a bit difficult to encourage investment. So it's said that investment from May 2012 will count as new in the capacity market. But of course, if you were to start building in 2012, you wouldn't actually know if they were even going to run an auction until 2014. It's going to publish its more detailed design proposals next year. So we've covered some of these points, but there'll be a single equal payment to all plant, new and old. But as Andrew said, you're going to need or want quite long-term agreements in order to know that you have the certainty to make investment worthwhile. And so they're thinking of offering up to 10 years for new plant in terms of agreements on capacity. The way the agreements will work is that they'll respond to delivered energy, or if you're looking at demand-side response, reduced demand, with, as I said, a financial penalty if you don't deliver, and that the system operator will come and check that you are in fact able to deliver capacity when needed. The way that they're planning to construct the capacity contracts is quite interesting, because it's the original proposal that they put forward for the contracts for difference in electricity market reform, which was sort of roundly rejected by industry and has been withdrawn. It's sort of popped up again under the heading capacity market. So the first half of the government's publications recently spend their time saying, oh, look, we've responded to industry, we've abandoned our desired structure for providing contracts for differences. But then when you get to the chapter on capacity markets, it pops up again, saying, but we are using it for capacity markets. And the way they want it to work is to have what they call contracts, we're not really sure if they are contracts, between all suppliers collectively and then the capacity provider, with an awful lot of the terms being implied in through the operation of the industry licenses and codes. That's something which electricity generators found unacceptable and persuaded the government to move to a conventional single counterparty model. So for you, the capacity provider would enter into a contract with a single counterparty who would then be bound to actually pay you. Under this system, the capacity provider will have to enter into something which would be more like an industry document, which will be deemed to be a contract with all suppliers. The contracts will be enforced by Ofgem, and the supplier obligation will be imposed on the supplier through the licence. There's currently a consultation out with suppliers to see whether suppliers are keen on this idea and on the mutualisation of losses in particular. And so there'll be a DEC response to the consultation sometime early next year. So I don't know whether or not people in the capacity market will be as interested in the design of the market as the renewable and nuclear generators were in the design of the contracts for difference, because I don't know how important the capacity payments will be on top of the market prices to investment. But if anybody's interested in understanding why the electricity industry told government that the arrangements simply couldn't work for the contracts for difference, which are the same arrangements they've now proposed for capacity payments, then obviously we'd be very happy to explain. And it might also be worthwhile, those who are interested in the capacity market, flicking through the terms that the government published on the contracts for difference, because they're quite likely to import anything that they can from the one system into the other system. So there are common issues around the extent of force majeure protection, which is quite limited, and the extent of protection on change in law or circumstance, which again is relatively limited. Just very quickly, the final bit of their electricity market reform is the emissions performance standard, where they propose to introduce a limit on all new fossil fuel-fired plant, but conventional gas shouldn't be affected by this, so it should advantage gas as compared with coal, and coal will be caught unless it's fitted with carbon capture and storage technology, presumably which works. And the government proposes to grandfather the level of the emissions performance standard until 2045 to give you some long-term certainty. If you're participating in the UK CCS demonstration programme, you will be exempt, which is lucky, and biomass will be zero rated.